Welcome to today's class. In today's lesson, we are going to introduce two new concepts. The concept of variables and that of the input function. So far, we've looked at the built-in print function. So now we want to introduce the concept of the input function. But before that, we'll look at variables, what variables mean, what they stand for in Python 3. In the previous classes, we looked at how to print out strings, numbers, and we saw that we need to put them in quotation marks, either the double quotes or single quotes, for it to be displayed. We also looked at how to comment out lines that we are not going to, we don't want to execute. We also mentioned that Python executes your codes line by line. So it starts from the first line, then second line, like that, keeps on going down. So to start this class, we are just going to go ahead and comment out all these previous lessons that we had. So in Wings 3, it's a fast way of doing it. You just select everything, right click, and then click comment out region, which is or Control+/. So I just click comment out region. So everything here has been commented out. So there's no need for me to go line by line, putting the hashtag symbol in front of each line. So what are variables? So let's start with some examples. If I write x, then put this equal sign, because let's say 4, for example, and I say y, equal sign, let's say 6. Yeah. So if I now print x and say print y, what do we get if I execute this code? See, we get 4 and 6. What's happening here is this. We are telling Python, I want you to assign this number 4 to this variable x. The x is the variable. So assign this number 4 to the variable x. Assign this number 6 to the variable y. A variable, you can maybe see it as a bag or a container that you use to store items in. So in this situation, you are storing these numbers in these two variables here. So at the current time, that's what they contain. So right now, what we have, x and y are not, the values they hold is 4 and 6. This here is not an equal sign actually. In Python, we don't really call it equal sign, we call it the assignment operator. The equal sign is made up of two equal signs. If you double equal sign, actually double equals. So what it means is that if you now say x equal 4, that means you have to put x, something like this, double x equal 4. So that means that x is actually equal to 4. The x and 4 are the same. But this particular one here, if you only have one equal sign, it just means assign this value 4 to this variable x at the moment. So to show how that will be different, if I now put 7 here, I say print x. So over here, x is 4, y is 6. I say print x, print y. Here I now assigned x to be 7, and I said print x again. So if we execute this code, you'll see what I mean. So the initial x was printed 4, the initial y was printed 6, but then the next x was printed to be printed is 7, because the variable has changed. It has been varied. The value is holding now is no more 4, it's now 6. And because Python executes the code line by line, so it executed the first one when it was 4. When it came to the second time, it was 7. So it's executed the new value, which is 7. So other things we can do, okay, we can maybe erase this for now. Another thing you can do is you can put maybe print x plus y, for example. And what do we get when we do that? Is 10, because the value x is holding is 4 and the value y is holding is 6. So similar situation is if we now change the value of x, for example. Let's say x is equal to 7, as we did before. And now we say print x y. So you'll see that the values have changed. All right. So you see the first value x in the variable for the x was 4. Next time, I now gave it y as 6. When we printed x, and then we printed x plus y, which was 10. So 4 plus 6. But then we changed x to 7 now, and then printed x plus y. So it's now actually 7 plus 6, which is giving us 13. So this is what variables are. And in the last class, I mentioned that there's a way, the space I leave here is just to make it for visual, so that you can see it clearer. But I mentioned also in the last class that there's a way if you want to actually print a space in the output here, there's a way to do that. So you can just say print and just put the 2 brackets with nothing inside, no argument inside, just write the print function. So when you execute this, you'll see that there'll be a gap between the 2 values, the 2 print values. So you see you have 4, 6, 10, which is print x plus y, and then the print, so you print an empty line, and then print x plus y again, so between the 10 and the 13. So if you put a print, just write the print function without any argument in it, it prints an empty line. All right, that's very good. So next, we want to also, another part of the, if you have just have that, just to give a gap. So the variable doesn't have to be a letter. It can be a string or a name or something. So an example we're going to use is username, for example. So you can say username. So let's give a name. I think the example we had on the blog was J. So you can say username equal J. You could say password. So this password now is variable. Username is a variable, password is a variable. So you can give it a string, or maybe just a number, 1, 2, 3, 4, for example. So if you now go down here and say print, okay, let's just print them on the same line. Print username, comma, password. And what do we have? What do we get? So we printed username and password J1234. So the variable can be a long name as well, a name or some string, some other. But if you're using multiple values, multiple names, assuming you want to, instead of saying, okay, let me just go up here. Instead of saying username, you want it to have a gap between the user and the name in the variable as a name. So you have to put an underscore. That way Python will understand what you're saying. So username, I think that's we had Ali. So you could now say print username, password, and say print user underscore name. So you see, it will give us 2 different things. So username, password, username as in one block is J, but user underscore name is Ali. So these are 2 different variables. So that's something to note. So next, I think this is clear, but if there's any question, you can always ask. So next we look at the concept of the input function. So I'm going to comment out these lines so that they don't print out. So you just have more space at the output. So I'll print out, I will comment out maybe up to this point. Let's comment this one's out. So maybe let me just delete this one now. So we have our username, J, password 123. But what if we want to write a program? So let me just comment this out too also. Let's just write everything afresh. What we want, if you want to write a program that will ask the user for their username and then ask them to provide their password, for example. So there's a function, a built-in function, just like we have print. We have this built-in function called input. Input. So input is another built-in function, just the way you have print as a built-in function. So what it does is that if you put input, if you run the code, when it gets to that line where the input is, it will stop and wait for the user to input a value. So usually we assign our variable. So let's start user name variable equals. So instead of writing J, we say input. So input. So in the input, we can put a string just to let the user know what you want them to input. So if you put your quotation mark, enter username, then maybe colon. And you remember I mentioned in the class, you need to give a space so that if you give a space, it will print the space. So let's just run this code and see what happens. So see, it says enter username. So that was what came out, enter username. So we can go ahead and give it a username. So let's do the first one, Ali, for example, and then press enter. So it has accepted it. So the code has executed. So we can do anything we want. You can say password, another variable, password, and then we say input. So we'll let the user know, enter, let the user know what we want them to enter. Okay, a colon and then a space, then quotation mark. We didn't discuss concept of error messages, but maybe we'll discuss it at the end of this class if you get things wrong. So if you run this, what happens? So we're writing the code. So it says enter username. So it will not execute the rest of the line until we provide this input. So it's waiting for the user input. So if I go ahead and say, let's say J this time around, enter password. So it's not going to execute the running code till I enter the password. So let's say 1, 2, 3, 4. Then it has executed. So we can go further now and say print username, which is the first variable, print password. So I think I spelled it right. So execute and see what happens. So it won't go further. Username, okay, let's say Ali. Password 1, 2, 3, 4. So it's waiting for my intervention. I have to before it proceeds. When I enter the password, what happens? So it now printed Ali. It printed 1, 2, 4. We can make this code a bit nicer or more interactive. We can just add a string here. Your username is gap. Then a comma, and then here let's add this string. Your password is so that it will allow, it will look more like a program. So username, it will just Ali, wrote as Ali, password 1, 2, 3, 4. The username is Ali, your password is 1, 2, 3, 4. So you see, just by putting the string together, and then it's looking like an actual program now that you can write and get users to input. So maybe let me just add one more line, but this is just up to your imagination. You can do whatever you want. So let's say print. Before printing your username, you can just say, is this string welcome, comma, then username, something like that. So when we run this, it will say something like, enter your username, maybe Ali. Okay, just be consistent. Ali, password 1234. Welcome, Ali. Your username is 123. Welcome, Ali. Your username is Ali. Your password is 1234. So you can do so many things. So you can, this is a block of code. It's almost like writing a program, get a user. So this is how you usually do it. You start gradually and then you build up and make it more and more complicated. So you could, we can do so many things. So maybe back to our, back to our previous code. Let me just kind of comment this one out. So let's come back to here. So we had X. Okay, let's uncomment this. So I will also mention the different numbers, integers, and so uncomment our region. So here is X is equal to 4, Y is equal to 6. So we could just make it X equals, instead of writing 4, we just say input input. So maybe enter X or enter value for X, for example. Maybe input enter value for Y. I'm not sure it's going to work because you need to specify that type of number, whether it's integer or, but maybe we'll look at that in the next program. But let me see. If it doesn't work, I will put that in and I'll explain it. But in the next class, we'll talk about it a bit further. So enter value for X. So let's say 4. Value for Y, let's say 6. So here it gave 46. It's actually 46 because when you input this, it concatenated the 4 and the 6 because the input is by itself. If you write it like that, it assumes what you're entering is a string. So it sees this 4 and 6 as strings. So it just concatenated them. Instead of adding them numerically, it just concatenated them. We'll also discuss it in the next class, but I will explain it now and then we will discuss further in the next class. So if you put a string, for example, enter X, and I say Ali, for example, enter Y, J, you see what I mean? So it just gave you Ali J. It just concatenated them. So to get that, for this input to become a number, so you have to put an integer, int before that. I will explain further in the next class. And then here to let you know that it's an integer, not a string. Int, and close the bracket again. So don't forget, by putting int, you've added the bracket. So if you run it now, what's we going to say? Enter value for X. So if I say 4 and I say 6, it should give me 10 this time around. So you see, it's printed X as 4, printed Y as 6, and then X plus Y is now 10. So it sees them as numbers, not as strings. It didn't concatenate, it's added numerically. So in the next class, we'll explain different type of numbers we have. So far, we mentioned that we have strings and we have numbers. But the numbers too, there are two types. There is integer and the float. So these are the two types, and the other types too. But maybe in maybe in the next part 2, we'll discuss that. So if there are any questions, please let me know. If there's anything to understand, I'll try my best to explain it better. Thank you very much.